And I said, no, I need it. I really need it tonight.
Mel Brooks doesn't hold grudges. He remembers. With a razor-sharp mind at 99, he recalls every actor who stumbled, stalled, or strutted onto set like they owned the show. In his world, comedy is chaos-controlled, and trust is sacred. Break that trust, and you're not just out of the film, you're erased. Forever. He's praised hundreds, but 5 actors crossed a line. These are the 5 Mel Brooks never forgave, and why their names vanished from his world. Part 1. Frank Langella, the vampire who took himself too seriously. Some actors lose roles. Frank Langella lost the director. On paper, he was perfect. Mel Brooks was developing Dracula, dead and loving it, and Langella had already dazzled Broadway as the Count, tall, magnetic, classically trained. He was Dracula, the serious kind, and that was exactly the problem. Mel wasn't making a gothic tragedy. He wanted slapstick, satire, pratfalls, and punchlines. Langella walked into pre-production like he was delivering Shakespeare. Every line felt carved in marble. He didn't riff, didn't respond to jokes, didn't break the tension. He was the tension. Rehearsals dragged. The crew whispered, "Is this supposed to be comedy or opera?" Brooks gave him a clever gag during a table read, a signature twist where drama builds to a ridiculous collapse. Langella paused, blinked, and asked, "Do you want me to mock the text?" Mel didn't blink. "No," he said. "I want you to survive it." That was it. Langella was replaced quietly by Leslie Nielsen, a master of chaos with a straight face. Nielsen delivered what Brooks wanted: timing, playfulness, absurdity. Langella never spoke of it again. Mel never mentioned his name in interviews. When asked about Dracula, dead and loving it, he used one word for Nielsen: perfect. In Mel's universe, there were 2 kinds of actors: those who danced with madness and those who tried to tame it. Langella came in wearing a crown, but Mel wasn't making royalty. He was making chaos, and you had to love the fall. Part 2. Gene Wilder, When Friendship Cuts Deeper Than Failure. Some betrayals come from rivals. Mel Brooks' deepest came from a friend. Gene Wilder wasn't just another actor. He was Mel's comedic soulmate. Together they changed what comedy could be. The producers, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein. These weren't just films. They were revolutions. Wilder wasn't a hired gun. He was family. But after Young Frankenstein, that family fractured. Wilder had written most of the script. Brooks directed it, refined it, and fought for the film to stay in black and white. The result? A masterpiece. But behind the applause, something began to splinter. Wilder had another story, the adventure of Sherlock Holmes' smarter brother, and he wanted Mel to produce it. Mel said no. Not because the script wasn't funny, not because it lacked potential, but because, in Mel's words, Gene thought he was ready to direct. I knew he wasn't. Wilder didn't take it as guidance. He took it as betrayal. He made the film without Mel. And though it starred familiar faces, Marty Feldman, Madeline Kahn, it lacked the spark, the rhythm, the magic. The timing felt off. The warmth was missing. The silence that followed spoke volumes. For years, they didn't speak. No arguments, no headlines, just distance. Mel once confided, "It was like watching your brother walk out with your best joke in his suitcase." They reconnected quietly years later, a handshake, a chuckle, a fragile peace. But the thread had snapped. They never worked together again. Not from anger, from disappointment. Mel once said Gene was the only actor he could share an unfinished scene with, a sketch without a punchline, and trust him to finish it perfectly. But after Smarter Brother, that trust never returned. In public, they remained kind, respectful. But in Mel's world, loyalty wasn't just a word, it was a rhythm. And once you step out of that rhythm, you don't get to step back in. Part 3. Chevy Chase, the man who never made it. And Chevy Chase was never fired by Mel Brooks, because Mel never hired him to begin with. It wasn't for lack of opportunity. During the 80s and early 90s, Chevy's name came up constantly. Studios pushed for it. Chase was a box office draw. Quick, witty, and a king of deadpan delivery. He looked like a Brooks character, but Mel refused, every single time. Why? Because Chase broke the one rule Mel held sacred. You don't step on the rhythm. Brooks had heard the stories. Talk show feuds, writers who bristled, directors who complained of his sarcasm cutting too deep. Chase could own a room and wreck it just as easily. Mel once said, he's not acting. He's waiting for everyone to stop talking so he can remind them he's the smartest guy in the room. Brooks didn't want the smartest guy. He wanted the most generous. Someone who could land a punchline, then let someone else take the applause. That wasn't Chevy. The closest they ever came to working together was Spaceballs. Studios floated Chase for the role of Dark Helmet. He had the voice, the presence, but Mel passed. He chose Rick Moranis instead. Rick knows when to step back, Mel explained. Chevy only knows how to interrupt. There was one meeting, brief, awkward. Nothing came of it. As Mel left the room, he reportedly smiled and said, "Maybe in another universe." Privately, he was more blunt. Some actors are so self-aware, they forget to be there. You can see them watching themselves in the scene. When an interviewer guessed he was referring to Chase, Mel just smiled and changed the subject. To Mel, comedy was about trust, chemistry, listening. And while Chase had brilliance, he also had a habit of weaponizing it. Mel didn't blacklist him. He just left him out. Not because Chevy wasn't funny, but because he didn't fit. In Mel's world, the misfits were welcome, but ego disguised as charm? That stayed outside the door. Part 4. Harvey Corman. When brilliance becomes a battle on screen, Harvey Corman was gold. Mel Brooks trusted him with some of the biggest laughs in Blazing Saddles, High Anxiety, and History of the World, Part 1. Corman could stretch a monologue, hold a ridiculous face just long enough, and collapse into chaos at the perfect moment. But behind the curtain, brilliance came with friction. Corman was bred in the world of sketch, the Carol Burnett show, where improv reigned, scripts bent, and the camera followed him. He was used to being the gravitational force of the room. But Mel didn't run a comedy playground. He ran a machine. Every beat, every look, every pause was engineered. He directed like a conductor. And if one instrument played out of tune, the whole thing fell apart. During High Anxiety, the tension boiled over. Mel cast Corman as Dr. Montague, the ominous head of the Psychoneurotic Institute for the very, very nervous. Corman had ideas. Rewrites, new quirks, tweaks to the role. Mel shut it down fast. "We already wrote the funny part. We just need you to do it." Corman didn't take it well. He paused between takes, pushed back on line delivery, questioned blocking. Mel, usually playful, full of energy, started keeping distance. Crew members called it passive warfare. No yelling, just frost. By the final week, they weren't speaking directly. Notes were passed through assistants. Corman isolated. The spark they once shared had turned rigid. The performance still worked. Corman was too skilled to let the tension show, but something in Mel had shifted. After High Anxiety, Harvey's name vanished from future casts, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. "Some actors bring joy to set," Mel later said. "Harvey brought brilliance, but it always came with resistance." There was no dramatic ending, no public feud, just a quiet, mutual understanding. They'd gone as far as they could. Corman continued praising Mel, and Mel never denied Corman's contribution to his greatest hits. But they never worked together again. In Brooks's world, rhythm was everything, and once it broke, no matter how loud the laugh, the curtain fell. Part 5. Jerry Lewis, When Genius Wasn't Worth the Fight. Mel Brooks admired genius, but he had no patience for arrogance. And with Jerry Lewis, he saw one wrapped inside the other. For decades, their names were uttered in the same breath. Two comedic titans, visionaries who wrote, directed, and performed. They built absurdist worlds, tore down conventions, and reimagined timing itself. But they never worked together. Not once. Studios pushed for it. A Mel-Jerry collaboration felt inevitable, but Mel resisted. Quietly, consistently. Privately, he called Lewis brilliant and exhausting. The final straw came during development for Liffinks, a biting satire about a billionaire forced to live on the streets. The studio suggested Lewis for a major role. It would bring prestige, they said. Mel refused. "I don't need someone who thinks he's funnier than the film," he told his producer. Lewis had a reputation, rewriting scenes on the fly, battling directors, sucking the oxygen out of every room. Brooks didn't share control, not in the edit bay, not on set. The two legends met once, a dinner arranged by a mutual friend. Mel came in curious. Lewis arrived late, launched into a 15-minute soliloquy about the future of American comedy, barely acknowledged Mel, and never once asked a question. Mel left early. He didn't want to collaborate, Mel said later. He wanted applause. From that day forward, the answer was always no. There was no feud, no gossip column quotes, just quiet rejection. A door closed before it ever opened. "If someone thinks they're the center of the universe," Mel once quipped, "they can't function in mine. I already have a sun." Lewis was a comet, fiery, erratic, brilliant. But in Mel's universe, no one performer was bigger than the constellation. Behind the camera, Brooks saw the disaster it would have been. Blow-ups, rewrites, power struggles. Too loud, too much, too late, he told a friend. So he admired Jerry from a distance, but never let him in, because even the most gifted actor can be banned when they mistake the set for a mirror. Dom DeLuise, the clown who almost pushed it too far. Mel Brooks loved Dom DeLuise, the laugh, the chaos, the childlike glee. In films like Silent Movie, History of the World Part 1, and Robin Hood Men in Tights, DeLuise was a scene stealer, unpredictable, larger than life, and gloriously absurd. But even affection has its limits. Mel once called Dom a storm in a jester's costume. He brought joy, yes, but also noise. And sometimes, that noise threatened the harmony Mel so desperately curated on set. Unlike the others on this list, Dom was never fired. He was never blacklisted. But Mel did start using him less, quietly, subtly. Not because Dom wasn't funny, he was hysterical, but because sometimes he was only funny to himself. There was one moment during History of the World where Dom ad-libbed an entire bit, a ridiculous off-the-wall monologue that derailed an entire scene. The crew laughed. The cast broke. But Mel, he didn't. He called cut, quietly walked over and whispered, "That was hilarious. Now let's go back to the version that works." Dom nodded, beaming. But after that day, his parts got shorter, his improvisations trimmed, his edges softened. Mel never spoke ill of him. In fact, he praised Dom till the end. But behind the scenes, the truth was clear. DeLuise was a burst of wild color, beautiful but hard to contain. And Mel Brooks didn't paint in chaos. He sculpted with it. Dom wasn't hated. He wasn't exiled. But in Mel's final chapters, his name was lovingly moved to the margins. Because even the clowns Mel adored had to remember, the circus still has a ringmaster. Mel's world had room for madness, but not for betrayal. Mel Brooks never threw tantrums. He didn't need public fallouts or fiery interviews. His power was quieter, more permanent. When an actor broke his trust, challenged his rhythm, or refused to play within the symphony of his chaos, the door simply closed. Silently, irrevocably. The 5, now 6 men in this list weren't talentless. Quite the opposite. They were brilliant. Some were legends. But brilliance alone never impressed Mel. What mattered was chemistry, timing, humility, and a deep, almost spiritual respect for the ensemble. Frank Langella brought gravity when Mel needed flight. Gene Wilder left the family and took the magic with him. Chevy Chase never understood that comedy is a dance, not a duel. Harvey Corman couldn't resist rewriting the music. Jerry Lewis mistook the camera for a mirror. And Dom DeLuise, the jester Mel adored, simply laughed a little too loud for a world built on control. In Mel's universe, getting cast wasn't the reward. Staying cast was. He built his empire on rhythm and trust, and when that rhythm cracked, he didn't fix it. He simply moved on. At 99, Mel Brooks looks back not with bitterness, but with clarity. These weren't enemies. They were detours, lessons, reminders that even in comedy, maybe especially in comedy, the space between the laughs matters just as much as the laughs themselves. So who else didn't make the cut? Who almost joined this quiet blacklist? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want early access to the next deep dive into Hollywood's unseen stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Because in Mel Brooks' world, you only get to break the rhythm once.